I have always felt an inexplicable attraction to ancient places. Those sites that carry the weight of centuries in their stones, and that seem to tell stories through their walls, stories that official history doesn't always capture. Places where time stands still, where the air feels heavier, laden with secrets yet to be revealed. Have you ever entered such a place? Where every creak in the floor, every gust of wind, seems to have a purpose, an intention. It's not just the history that books tell you, but the one that lingers in the air, the one you can only sense if you pay close enough attention. Today, I want to invite you on a journey that goes beyond what is visible to the naked eye. A tour through some of the world's most fascinating and terrifying places, where history and the supernatural intertwine in ways that will make you question what you think you know. From medieval castles, with legends still echoing in the darkness of their dungeons, to forgotten islands where human suffering left a mark so deep that it seems to have transcended time. Today's destination isn't just a stroll through history. It's an immersion into the darkest and most mysterious corners of our past. We'll venture into places where the echoes of the lives lived there still seem to resonate. You might wonder, what's so special about an old castle or a ruined church? Well, sometimes, it's not what you see, but what you feel. There are places that seem to have a life of their own, as if the stories that happened there don't want to be forgotten, as if the people who lived them aren't entirely willing to leave. Throughout this journey, I'll take you down paths that many fear to tread, where the wind doesn't just blow but seems to whisper secrets into your ear. Together we'll ask, how much truth is there in these legends? Are they just stories to scare the curious, or is there something more, something that defies our understanding? Get ready to uncover what hides in the shadows of history. Are you ready? Because what we're about to find may change the way you see these places forever. Story 1, Edinburgh Castle. The cold Edinburgh wind greeted me with a sort of somber welcome as I climbed the hill towards the imposing Edinburgh Castle. From afar, you could already feel the commanding presence of the fortress. The sky was overcast, as if even the weather wanted to emphasize the air of mystery surrounding this place. Upon reaching the entrance, I couldn't help but notice the thick walls that seemed to have witnessed centuries of history and countless secrets. Walking through the stone corridors, you can't shake the feeling that you're treading on ground where the past is still very present. Here, every stone seems to whisper tales of battles, betrayals, and yes, ghosts. How could I not think of them? This castle has witnessed some of the darkest moments in Scotland's history, and according to many, those restless souls haven't quite been able to leave. The castle's history dates back to the 12th century, though its oldest remains are even older. Since then, it has been a symbol of power and resistance. Sieges, massacres, and executions have stained these walls with blood and despair. However, what intrigued me most were the stories that were never told in history books. The legends, the mysteries, and the ghosts. They say that one of the most well-known ghosts here is that of the headless drummer. I was at the highest part of the castle, near David's Tower, when a guide mentioned this story. According to legend, a young soldier was beheaded for disobeying orders, and since then, his spirit has wandered the castle, playing a drum that only some can hear. While the guide spoke, my mind began to wander. I imagined that young soldier, condemned to wander for eternity, his drum echoing in the darkness, each beat a call that would never be answered. Was it real, or just a story to scare tourists? And just as I was lost in those thoughts, a dull noise snapped me out of my reverie. A distant drum, or maybe just the echo of my imagination. But the drummer isn't the only restless spirit wandering these grounds. As I continued exploring the castle, I found a small underground cell. It is said that a French prisoner was imprisoned here who, in a desperate attempt to escape, hid in a dung barrel that was to be thrown into the sea. However, luck wasn't on his side, and instead of being freed, the barrel crashed onto the rocks, where his body was crushed. Locals claim that his spirit still roams the castle, searching for a way to escape that he will never find. The strangest thing of all is that, as I wandered those dungeons, the air seemed to grow heavier, as if an invisible presence was watching my every move. At one point, while descending a stone staircase, I felt a cold breeze on the back of my neck, but there were no windows or drafts. Just silence and darkness. I stopped for a second, wondering if I was starting to succumb to the atmosphere or if something else was truly following me. The ghosts of the castle are not mere modern inventions. In fact, many have been recorded for centuries. One example is the ghost of Lady Janet Douglas, a woman unjustly accused of witchcraft in 1537. Legend has it that her spirit has been seen wandering near St. Margaret's Chapel, where she was burned at the stake. I couldn't help but feel a deep sadness upon hearing her story. How many women, like her, were victims of superstition and fear? And now, centuries later, her spirit still hasn't found peace. The most intriguing part of my visit was when I arrived at Queen Anne's Bridge. This is a part of the castle famous for sightings of inexplicable shadows. While standing there, looking at the city from the heights, I couldn't help but notice a strange shadow moving near the corner of the bridge. There was no one else there, at least, not that I could see. Was it my imagination again? Maybe. But in that place, with history weighing on my shoulders, it was hard not to believe that something more was happening. Another story that impacted me was that of the ghost dog. Around the pet cemetery, many visitors and guards have claimed to have seen a small black dog wandering among the graves. At first, I thought it must be some stray dog, but then I learned that the cemetery is closed to the public, and no animal has access to it. Could it be that a dog, faithful to its owner even after death, remains here guarding its grave? Of course, some would say that all these are just legends. Tales to impress tourists, stories passed down from generation to generation until they take on a life of their own. But what happens when these legends seem to have too many witnesses, too many coincidences? At one point, while I was alone in one of the old stone corridors, I felt a chill run down my spine. I quickly turned, convinced that someone was behind me. But there was no one. Just emptiness. Edinburgh Castle, with its centuries of history, isn't just a monument to past battles and ancient kings. It's a place where the inexplicable seems to coexist with the everyday, where the past and present mix in ways that defy our understanding. As I made my way towards the exit, I couldn't help but glance once more at the castle's towers. Something inside me knew that, although I was leaving, part of that place was staying with me. Was it the echo of the stories I had heard? Or something deeper, something older, something that still inhabits those walls? Edinburgh Castle is, without a doubt, a place where mystery and history intertwine in such a way that it's impossible to separate them. And as I walked through the city as night fell, a part of me kept hearing that distant drum, echoing in the darkness. Story 2, The Tower of London. As the morning fog began to lift, I could see the imposing and somber silhouette of the Tower of London. As I approached, I felt a mixture of awe and apprehension, as if this place was charged with an energy that did not entirely belong to this world. The history of this place is as vast as it is terrifying. Its walls have witnessed executions, betrayals, conspiracies, and, of course, the relentless wandering of the ghosts who refuse to leave this realm of shadows. Crossing the entrance, the weight of history hit me like a gust of cold wind. This was no ordinary castle or fortress. It was a prison, a torture chamber, a place where royalty and traitors, heroes and villains, all faced their fate. As I walked through the stone corridors, I became immersed in the dark legends this place holds so tightly. The first thing that came to mind was the story of the princes in the tower, one of the most tragic and mysterious tales in England. Two young boys, the sons of King Edward IV, were imprisoned here in 1483 after their uncle, Richard III, claimed the crown for himself. What happened next is shrouded in mystery. Some say the princes were secretly murdered, their bodies buried in some dark corner of the tower. Others claim they escaped and lived in anonymity. But what is certain is that, since then, sightings have been reported of two childlike figures walking hand in hand, with sad and disoriented expressions, as if they are still searching for the peace they never found in life. I paused for a moment at the very staircase where the princes were said to have been last seen. The echo of my footsteps reverberated off the cold stone walls. It was impossible not to feel the presence of something else in that place. Perhaps it was just my mind playing tricks with the shadows, or maybe, like so many others before me, I was sensing the residual energy of those tragic events. As I continued through the White Tower, the central and oldest building of the fortress, another story took hold of my mind, that of Anne Boleyn. The famous queen, wife of Henry VIII, was beheaded here in 1536, accused of treason, adultery, and incest. While the official history painted her as a traitor, many believe she was a victim of the political intrigues of the time. After her execution, it's said that her spirit has been seen wandering the grounds of the tower, sometimes holding her own head in her hands. Of all the ghosts of the Tower of London, Anne Boleyn's is the most famous. Guards and visitors have reported seeing a female figure, dressed in period attire, silently gliding through the halls, as if her quest for justice continues even in death. I remember walking through the very place where Anne Boleyn was executed, in what's called the execution courtyard. The wind seemed to whisper ancient secrets, and the atmosphere was so heavy it was almost suffocating. I imagined Anne, proud and resolute, facing her fate with dignity. And I wondered, what does it feel like to be betrayed by those you trust most? Could her spirit be unable to rest until her name is vindicated? The air was thick with an energy that's hard to describe, as if the past and present were coexisting in the same space. In that moment, I felt an inexplicable connection to the souls who spent their final moments in this place. It was as though the very walls were steeped in the emotions of those who had faced their final judgments here. As I ventured toward the upper chambers, the guide told us a story that sent chills down my spine. In 1816, it said that one of the tower guards saw a spectral bear within the castle. According to the tale, the guard attempted to confront the creature, but when he approached, his bayonet pierced nothing but empty air. However, the man collapsed immediately and died a few days later, apparently from fright. Why would a spectral bear appear in the Tower of London? No one knows for sure, but the story has been passed down over the years, adding yet another mystery to the already haunting atmosphere of the tower. Walking through the area known as the Jewel House, where the crown jewels are kept, I was surprised to learn that even here, amidst the opulence and glitter, there have been reports of inexplicable sightings. One guard claimed to have seen a shadowy figure that vanished among the display cases one night, just before the clock struck midnight. What's particularly intriguing about this case is that it wasn't a single isolated testimony. Other guards have also reported similar experiences over the years. However, of all the stories I heard during my visit, one of the most disturbing was that of Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury. In 1541, Margaret was executed here, but her death was especially cruel. It said that, when ordered to kneel before the executioner, she attempted to escape. The executioner chased her across the courtyard, repeatedly striking her until she finally fell dead. Rumors that her spirit, still tormented, wanders the Tower of London do not surprise those familiar with her tragic end. The desperate cries of a woman have been heard in the early hours of the morning, always near the site of her brutal execution. After hearing these stories, I couldn't help but feel a growing respect for this place. The Tower of London is not just a symbol of power or a tourist attraction. It is a place where the boundaries between the world of the living and the dead seem thinner than we imagine. As I left the castle, just before sunset, I paused on the bridge that connects the tower to the city. From there, you can see the Thames River, flowing slowly, like a silent witness to everything that has happened on this land. I gazed at the tower's walls from that distance, and something within me changed. I no longer saw just a historical monument. I saw a place charged with energy, a space where time seemed to have frozen in certain corners, allowing the souls trapped between two worlds to continue their restless search for peace. The Tower of London is not just a place to study history. It's a place to feel it, to experience the weight of centuries and the lives that still resonate within its walls. And as night fell and the shadows lengthened, I realized that although I was leaving, part of me would remain tied to that place, with the stories of Anne Boleyn, the lost princes, and the other ghosts that still inhabit the tower. Perhaps, the next time you find yourself in London, you will be brave enough to visit this place, but beware, be mindful of the shadows that might follow you. Story 3, The Stanley Hotel, Colorado. The air in Colorado has a unique freshness, a purity that envelopes you the moment you step out of the car. But that morning, as I approached the majestic Stanley Hotel, there was something more than the cold mountain wind brushing against my face. There was a palpable sense of anticipation, a whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the building. This wasn't my first visit to a place with a reputation for being haunted, but there was something different about the Stanley. Its history resonated deeply, and what intrigued me most was how it had inspired one of the most terrifying works of modern literature, Stephen King's The Shining. The hotel stands proudly in the heart of Estes Park, its white colonial architecture contrasting with the green hills and blue sky. From the outside, everything seemed perfectly in place, as if time had not left its mark on the walls or the gardens. But, as I had learned many times on my travels to historical and haunted sites, appearances can be deceiving. I entered the lobby, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. Even though the hotel was full of tourists, families, and visitors, it seemed as if the sound dissipated, as if there were an invisible barrier maintaining the calm. I walked through the carpeted hallways, feeling a slight pressure in my chest. There was something in those long, empty hallways, something in the air, an imperceptible tension that kept you constantly aware of your surroundings. As I approached the reception, I couldn't help but think of Stephen King and his experience in this very hotel. The story is well known. In 1974, he and his wife were the only guests at the Stanley on a cold October night. The hotel was about to close for the season, making it feel even more desolate. During their stay, King had a nightmare in which his young son ran through the endless hallways, chased by a fire hose. That nightmare was the seed that would grow into The Shining, a novel that captured the terror of a place that seemed to have a life of its own. As I explored the corners of the hotel, I began to notice details that didn't quite fit. In room 217, the very one where King stayed, guests often report unexplained activity. Lights turn on and off by themselves, luggage moves, and some have even heard footsteps when no one else was nearby. According to legend, in 1911, a hotel employee named Elizabeth Wilson was severely injured during a gas explosion in that room. Although she survived, her spirit never left the hotel. Was it her presence that still lingered, watching over guests as she did in life? I paused in front of the door to room 217, and although I didn't expect to see anything supernatural, the air around seemed denser, as if something invisible were watching from the other side. I laughed at my own nerves, but that laughter quickly faded when, suddenly, the door creaked slightly, as if someone were pushing it from the inside. I took a step back, my heart pounding. Was it just a coincidence or something more? I decided not to find out at that moment, but the feeling of being watched lingered as I walked away. One of the hotel employees, noticing my interest, came over and began to tell me other stories about the place. The Stanley wasn't only famous for room 217, every corner of the hotel had its own story. The ballroom, for example, is another hotspot for paranormal activity. Guests and staff have reported hearing soft music, as if an event were taking place, but when they entered, the ballroom was empty and completely silent. On some nights, the figure of a woman dressed in early 20th century clothing has been seen dancing alone, lost in time. I headed towards the ballroom, feeling a mix of curiosity and fear. The ornately carved wooden doors opened with a soft creak, and before me stretched a large, elegantly decorated space. Despite the daylight, the atmosphere inside the ballroom was somber, as if the weight of decades of history was present in every corner. There was no music at that moment, but I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the scene, the spectral figure of a woman gliding across the dance floor, her feet barely touching the ground as an inaudible music filled the air. Another story I was told involved F.O. Stanley, the hotel's founder. Although Stanley died in 1940, many claim to have seen him walking through the lobby or climbing the stairs, watching over his creation. Even the smell of tobacco, a scent associated with him, is sometimes detected in the hallways, even though smoking has been banned in the hotel for years. I found myself thinking about what it must be like to be so deeply connected to a place that even death cannot separate you from it. Perhaps, after all, Stanley never wanted to leave his cherished hotel. As I wandered through the hallways, I came across a group of tourists discussing a commonly reported phenomenon in the hotel, the sound of children laughing. These laughs, often heard at night, are particularly common near the main staircase. Some believe they are echoes of the children of past guests who stayed at the hotel, while others believe there is something darker behind these childish sounds. The idea of hearing children's laughter in an empty place, especially in the middle of the night, was deeply unsettling to me. I decided to investigate more about the hotel and its possible paranormal origins. It seems that the area where the Stanley was built had a long history of spiritual activity. The Native American tribes who inhabited the region believed that the surrounding mountains were sacred and that certain areas were portals to the spirit world. Could it be that the hotel was built on one of these places, trapping the energy of those who had passed through before? The day was turning to evening, and I decided to make one last stop in the hotel's basement, where the billiard room is located. Here, many employees have reported feeling a presence watching them from the shadows. Some have felt an invisible hand touching them, while others have heard whispers seemingly coming from the walls themselves. I entered the room, and the air immediately felt heavier. The lights flickered slightly, and although I was alone, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't entirely by myself. I sat by one of the billiard tables, watching as the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move with a life of their own. I don't know if it was the stories I had heard throughout the day or if there was truly something in that room, but a growing discomfort made me stand up and leave quickly. On my way back to the lobby, I couldn't help but think about how this place had influenced Stephen King, and I wondered how many of the stories he created for The Shining were based on real experiences he had here. The Stanley Hotel is a place that seems to float between two worlds, one full of history and elegance, and another full of shadows and echoes of the past. For some, it's simply a beautiful hotel with stunning views. For others, it's a place where the spirits of yesteryear still wander, unable to leave the grounds they have known for so long. As I prepared to leave, I paused for a moment in the lobby, looking at the imposing building from the outside. Despite everything I had experienced, the hotel remained just as majestic. However, I knew that, like so many others before me, I would take away something more than just memories from my stay. The Stanley Hotel leaves a mark, a feeling that lingers even after you've gone. And as I walked away, I couldn't help but glance back one last time, as if expecting to see something or someone in one of the windows, silently watching me as I said goodbye to that enchanted place. Story 4, Poveglia, the Island of the Dead. Poveglia. Even the name evokes dark images of long shadows and distant echoes resonating in the distance. It is a small island located in the Venetian lagoon, seemingly tranquil from afar but shrouded in an aura of mystery and terror that has endured for centuries. Known to many as the Island of the Dead, it is a place few dare to approach, and those who do claim that something more than history remains trapped among its ruins. As the boat approached Poveglia's shore, I felt a chill that didn't come from the wind but from something deeper, a sensation that cut to the bone. From a distance, the island appears harmless, with trees swaying in the wind and ancient buildings slowly crumbling. But once you set foot on solid ground, the atmosphere changes. It's as if the air itself is thick with dark memories, with whispers of souls who never found rest. The history of Poveglia is, like many unsettling stories, a blend of tragedy, death, and suffering. In the 14th century, during the bubonic plague, Venice, in a desperate attempt to contain the disease, used the island as a massive quarantine site. Thousands of people, infected or not, were sent here to die. It is estimated that over 160,000 people were abandoned on this small island, their bodies burned in mass graves, their souls, it is said, wandering endlessly for eternity. The most chilling aspect of this is that the remnants of those tragedies are still palpable today. As I walked along the island's dusty paths, I couldn't help but think that the very soil of Poveglia is made up of 50% human ashes. The bones, burned and disintegrated, were mixed with the earth, creating a ground that is literally part of the plague victims. That thought haunted me with every step. What is it like to walk on the legacy of death, knowing that beneath your feet lie the remains of thousands? It wasn't long before I arrived at what remains of the psychiatric hospital that operated on the island in the 20th century. The walls were covered in graffiti, and the building seemed on the verge of collapsing, but what disturbed me most was not the state of the place, but what had occurred there. Poveglia was not only a quarantine site during the plague, but also home to one of Italy's most notorious insane asylums. According to accounts, patients interned in that hospital were not only physically ill, but mentally as well, and were subjected to inhumane treatments, including cruel experiments and lobotomies. One of the darkest tales surrounding this place is that of the doctor who ran the hospital. It is said he was known for his sadism, conducting brutal experiments on patients. But even he could not escape the island's curse. According to legend, the doctor began to go mad, tormented by the souls of the patients he had tortured. One day, driven by a mix of remorse and insanity, he threw himself from the hospital's bell tower. However, the story does not end there. It is said he did not die instantly, but was dragged by a dark, ghostly figure to the ground, where he finally perished. Today, some visitors claim that the spirit of this doctor still wanders the place, trapped in an endless cycle of guilt and madness. Standing in front of that tower, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the broken windows of the building. I looked up, seeking answers in the remnants of the structure, but all I found was an unsettling silence. The wind blew gently, but there was not a single sound to accompany its whisper. The silence was total, enveloping, making me feel as if the island itself was watching me. As I continued my exploration of Poveglia, I encountered more evidence of its dark past. Ancient mass graves, still visible among the vegetation, mingled with the remains of crumbling buildings. The trees, tall and twisted, seemed to grow unnaturally, as if their roots were feeding on the buried tragedy beneath the soil. Every step I took felt heavy, as if the island itself was trying to hold me back, keeping me trapped in its dark history. The locals of Venice have their own stories about Poveglia. Many believe the island is cursed and refuse to go near it. Even fishermen avoid sailing close to its shores, fearing that their nets might drag up more than just fish. Some claim to have seen strange lights flickering in the distance at night, as if the souls of the dead were trying to communicate with the world of the living. Others say they have heard screams in the distance, screams that cannot be explained by the wind or the animals inhabiting the island. I decided to venture further into the island, moving towards the cemetery where, according to legends, thousands of plague victims were buried in a desperate attempt to control the disease. As I approached, the air grew heavier, as if the very atmosphere was saturated with despair. The ground was covered in underbrush and fallen trees, but among the branches and debris, one could still make out the stones and crosses marking ancient graves. Here, in this remote and forgotten place, death seemed to be the only constant. I paused in silence, allowing the weight of history to engulf me. Poveglia is not just a haunted island. It is a place where life and death intertwine in ways beyond comprehension. A place where pain, suffering, and tragedy have left an indelible mark on every corner, every stone, every shadow. By the end of my visit, as the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the island, I felt a strange peace. Not a peace of tranquility, but a peace that comes from accepting that there are places in this world where suffering is so profound that it can never be fully understood or healed. Poveglia is one of those places. A place where the living and the dead coexist, trapped between the past and the present, waiting for a redemption that may never come. As I departed the island by boat, I turned one last time to look at Poveglia. From a distance, it seemed almost beautiful, with its green vegetation and crumbling architecture bathed in the light of the setting sun. But I knew, deep down, that what I had seen and felt there would stay with me. The story of Poveglia, the island of the dead, is a story that cannot be forgotten, for it is a story that has not ended. As the boat drifted away from Poveglia and the silhouette of the island of the dead faded on the horizon, I couldn't help but reflect on what I had experienced. Throughout this journey, we have visited places that, at first glance, may seem like mere old buildings or lonely islands, but behind their facades lies a much darker and more complex reality. Each of these historical sites shares something in common. They are witnesses to horrors and mysteries of the past, guardians of secrets that, even after so many centuries, continue to fascinate and terrify those who dare to explore them. Poveglia, the Tower of London, Edinburgh Castle, the Stanley Hotel. All these places left me with a sense of awe, but also with a lingering question: what makes a place truly haunted? Is it the energy of the tragedies that occurred there? Is it our own imagination, influenced by the stories we've heard and the movies we've seen? Or perhaps it is something deeper, something we cannot fully comprehend, but feel deeply when confronted with the inexplicable. What is most fascinating about these places is how they seem to merge history and mystery in a unique way. They are not merely sites of tragedy, they are symbols of human suffering, of the struggle to survive, of the fear of the unknown, and of how collective memory retains those dark moments. Walking through their corridors, climbing their stairs, feeling the weight of their walls, it is impossible not to connect with the people who lived, suffered, and died within them. Yet, despite the historical and mysterious weight of these places, there is something else I have always found captivating: the power of memory. Every story, every legend told about these sites feeds that mystery and keeps the departed alive. In some way, the souls of the people who died on Poveglia, at the Tower of London, or in Edinburgh Castle remain present, not only in the echoes of the buildings, but in the stories we tell. These stories have the power to transcend time, making what happened centuries ago still resonate today. As our journey draws to a close, I wonder what makes these stories so powerful. Perhaps it is the blend of truth and fiction, the way mystery becomes a tool to explore our own fears and insecurities. Or perhaps it is that deep down, we are all seeking answers. Answers about death, the afterlife, what happens when we leave this world. And those places, steeped in history, seem to offer a window into those answers. But ultimately, what I take away from this experience is not so much the resolution of a mystery, but the realization that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. The beauty of these haunted places lies in the fact that we will never know the whole truth. The echoes of the past will continue to reverberate, and we, as modern explorers of the inexplicable, will continue to search for answers, even if we may never find them. You might be wondering, after all you've heard, what to believe. Is all of this real? Are these stories more than mere legends? Well, that is the magic of historical mysteries. They leave you with more questions than answers, and that's okay. At the end of the day, what matters is not whether ghosts really exist or if those lost souls still wander the corridors of these places. What matters is what those stories make us feel, what they teach us about ourselves, our fears, and our hopes. So, if you ever have the chance to visit one of these places, I invite you to do so with an open mind and a heart willing to feel. You may not see a ghost, but you will surely feel something. Maybe it's the history speaking to you, or perhaps it's your own imagination playing with the shadows of the past. As we reach the end of this journey, I invite you to reflect on what you have just heard. What intrigued you the most? Was there a place that captured your attention more than others? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know which of these sites you'd like to visit or which story impacted you the most. Perhaps you've also had an inexplicable experience or an encounter with the unknown. If so, don't hesitate to share it with us. This is a space where we can all explore these mysteries together. Remember, the mysteries of the past surround us in every corner of the world. Sometimes they are hidden in ancient castles, other times in abandoned islands or in hotels that seem too quiet to be true. And as long as we continue to tell their stories, those places and the souls that inhabited them will continue to live on in our collective memory. Thank you for joining me on this journey through some of the most eerie and mysterious sights in the world. Who knows what the next destination will be? Perhaps another place awaits to be explored, another mystery to unravel. But that, dear friend, is a story for another day.